Tonight at 10, Tony Blair calls for people to rise up against Brexit. The former Prime Minister said it was his mission to persuade people to change their minds about leaving the EU.
The people voted without knowledge of the terms of Brexit. As these terms become clear, it is their right to change their mind.
We heard all these arguments last year. Not a thing has changed. And I think it really is insulting the intelligence of the electorate to say that they got it wrong.
We'll be asking whether Mr Blair's intervention is likely to have any impact on Brexit. Also tonight, can Marmite and ketchup mix? Britain's third largest company, Unilever, is targeted for takeover by the US food giant Kraft Heinz. The battle to liberate Iraq's second biggest city from so-called Islamic State. Preparations for a major new offensive on Mosul.
When these men were in the east, they experienced 56 Islamic State car bombs. So the question they are asking is, what does the Islamic State have left?
And after more than 20 years at Arsenal, Arsene Wenger hints that his days at the club may be numbered.
And here in the south, the social media boasting by a gang of girls after they violently attacked a 14-year-old with a wheel brace. And an emotional moment as a deaf husband and wife hear each other's voices for the first time.
Good evening. Tony Blair has urged people to rise up against Brexit and said it was his mission to persuade voters to change their minds about leaving the EU. The former Prime Minister has called for a cross-party movement to avoid Brexit at any cost, which he said would damage the economy and weaken Britain's influence. He said people had voted without knowledge of the true terms of EU departure. But the Foreign Secretary, Boris Johnson, accused Mr Blair of insulting the public's intelligence. Here's our political correspondent, Carol Walker.
A rallying cry from the former Prime Minister. Time, he said, to rise up and force a rethink on the decision to leave the European Union.
The people voted without knowledge of the terms of Brexit. As these terms become clear, it is their right to change their mind. Our mission is to persuade them to do so.
He said he'd expose the risks of the current plans for Brexit, damage to the economy and jobs. With the breakup of the UK back on the table, he said controlling immigration had become the government's main consideration as it took the country towards not just hard Brexit, but Brexit at any cost.
I would actually question whether the referendum really provides a mandate for Brexit at any cost. We'll withdraw from the single market, which is around half of our trade in goods and services. We will also now leave the customs union, covering trade with countries like Turkey. This impacts everything from airline travel to financial services to manufacturing industry, sector by sector.
The Prime Minister's been meeting her French counterpart, Bernard Cazeneuve, this afternoon, as she prepares to begin the formal Brexit negotiations within weeks. She said she'll seek the greatest possible access to the European single market through a new free trade agreement.
Prime Minister, will you take the advice of Tony Blair?
Ministers are scathing about Mr Blair's intervention.
We heard all these arguments last year. Not a thing has changed. And I think it really is insulting the intelligence of the electorate to say that they got it wrong.
Tony Blair believes the government's whole approach to Brexit is being driven by ideologues passionate about the moves to take Britain out of the European Union, and that the Labour Party is failing to provide the opposition that's required. But some will doubt whether he's the man to lead a popular movement to overturn the Brexit vote.
Tony Blair didn't say he wants a second referendum, so how would he overturn the result?
Do you really think that you're the one with the popular appeal to get a different answer if you did get a second go?
This is a free country, so I've got a right to speak and you've got the freedom to listen or not. Right? You don't want to listen to me, don't listen to me. So that's, I'm very clear and simple on this. I know that there will be a volley of abuse that will come my way for speaking, but I'm speaking because I believe in it and I care about the country.
And he does still have some supporters in the party he used to lead.
So whether you love him or loathe him, I think he's somebody that we should listen to. He's got huge experience of politics at the top level.
But as Theresa May embarks on the complex and difficult negotiations with EU leaders, the warning from one of her predecessors is unlikely to be her biggest concern.
And Carol's in Westminster now. What impact is his intervention likely to have then?
I think what he's hoping to do is to change the terms of the debate, to convince us all that Brexit is not inevitable. Now, he's not founding a new party, but he does want to try to build a movement. He's going to found an institute to try to further his cause. But of course, leading Brexit campaigners have been lining up to try to stop him in his tracks, accusing him of being out of touch, arrogant, undemocratic, treating the British people as fools. He won't really get much support from the Labour leadership. Jeremy Corbyn, hardly a Tony Blair fan at the best of times, has made it clear he believes that the Labour Party should accept the vote in that referendum, accept the will of the people and support the government in beginning those Brexit negotiations. And even some people who share Tony Blair's concerns about Brexit and the whole approach of the government are wary of Tony Blair's involvement. The former Prime Minister, of course, was a redoubtable campaigner in his day. He won 3 general elections. But the legacy of the Iraq War means he is a hugely divisive figure. For that reason, it will be very difficult indeed for him to build the sort of coalition he needs. And so I think the overall impact on the march to Brexit will probably be pretty limited.
Carol Walker in Westminster, thank you. The American food giant Kraft Heinz has made a £100 billion takeover bid for Unilever, the Anglo-Dutch company that owns some of the UK's most famous brands. The offer's been rejected for now, but Kraft, which also has household name brands like Heinz ketchup and Cadbury, may well continue to push for a deal. If it happens, it would be one of the largest mergers in corporate history. Our business editor, Simon Jack, reports.
Unilever. A name that may not be well known in every household, but every household will recognise what it makes. Brands like Marmite, PG Tips, Surf and dozens more. Another whopping company, Kraft Heinz, which makes ketchup obviously, but also brands like HP Sauce and Maxwell House, wants to put all of these brands in one enormous basket. Unilever say Kraft are trying to get the company on the cheap and have rejected the offer. But in mega deals like this, the first offer is rarely the last, and Kraft will have a plan to justify a higher one.
They do that by radically cutting costs within Unilever and pushing up Unilever's profits beyond what Unilever have been themselves prepared to offer to the market. And Kraft will do that because they have a very different perception of what a fair rate of profit is for an international consumer goods business than we do here in Europe.
When it comes to takeovers, it doesn't get much bigger than this. Kraft is offering £115 billion, which would put this deal in the top 3 mergers and acquisitions of all time. The combined company, at today's prices, would be worth over £200 billion. It would wield enormous power, one of the reasons both companies' shares rose on the prospect that despite Unilever's refusal, a deal may yet get done. Kraft has a track record of buying well-known UK brands and not a good one. In 2009, it bought Cadbury. After promising to keep Cadbury's Somerdale factory near Bristol open, it quickly backtracked and said it would close the plant. That led to changes to the takeover rules, requiring companies to spell out their plans for jobs and premises in more detail, but many feel they don't go far enough.
At the moment, the legal powers don't allow the government to block takeovers of this kind, but there is, of course, a wider competition issue, which the competition authorities should certainly investigate.
The sharp fall in the pound post-referendum has made UK companies cheap for foreign buyers. Tech giant Arm Holdings snapped up. Sky a target once again for 20th Century Fox. That's the UK open for business, say some. That's great businesses on special, say others. Unilever says it's not just about price. These two companies, like Marmite and ketchup, just don't go well together. Shareholders will have the last word. Simon Jack, BBC News.
One of the key drivers of the UK economy, retail sales, fell unexpectedly last month, following on from a similar drop in December. The Office for National Statistics said the slowdown was because of a rise in fuel and food costs following the EU referendum. Iraqi security forces are set to begin a major new offensive against the so-called Islamic State in Mosul. Iraq's second largest city was seized by the jihadist group over 2 years ago as they took control of northern and western Iraq. Last month, after a 12-week offensive, government forces recaptured the eastern half of Mosul, claiming to have fully liberated it. But around 750,000 civilians remain inside the west of the city, which is still controlled by the Islamic State group. From Mosul's southern front, our Middle East correspondent Quentin Somerville reports.
In towns and villages along the Tigris and across the desert, they're readying for the attack on West Mosul. The so-called Islamic State lies just over this ridge. As coalition warplanes circle overhead, a scouting party returns from plotting IS positions. These are the men of Iraq's Emergency Response Division, Police Special Forces. The hour of battle is moving closer. It took 100 days to take the cities east. They've been rested and re-equipped, but the battle scars are still fresh. They took heavy casualties, but as they've fought IS across Iraq, they've grown in confidence.
We have liberated many cities across Iraq. We now have experience of IS tactics, and we also had good training from the beginning. We are now just waiting for orders to start a new operation to free the West.
The west of Mosul will be a different battle. This mortar team is going through final weapons checks. The city's dense neighbourhoods mean great care will be needed to protect civilians. Nearly 750,000 are still in the city. They'll be in the middle of this firepower. When these men were in the east, they experienced 56 Islamic State car bombs. So the question they are asking is, what does the Islamic State have left? How much weaponry and how many men? And how fiercely will IS fight for its last remaining city in Iraq? British boots are on the ground too. Major General Rupert Jones is on a last-minute inspection of coalition troops. They'll be supporting the Iraqi assault on Mosul.
In terms of how long it will take, well, look, East Mosul took 100 days. West Mosul could be every bit as tough, so, you can work it out from there. You don't retake towns and cities the size of Mosul, heavily defended, quickly. The Iraqis know that. It'll be a tough fight, but I'm very confident they'll prevail with our support.
On the parade ground, Kurdish forces and the Defence Secretary bringing a reminder of why Britain is in this fight.
We're picking up information all the time now, information about those foreign fighters, for example, who are in Mosul, information too about some of the attacks that have been planned in Western Europe. So this work is not simply freeing people in Mosul from having to live under this brutal regime.
This won't be Iraq's last fight against IS, but it may be the toughest. Thousands of Iraqis are now once again on their way to face the Islamic State. The West is counting on their victory. Quentin Somerville, BBC News, on Mosul's southern front.
The United States Senate has approved one of Donald Trump's most controversial nominees for his new cabinet. Scott Pruitt will lead the Environment Protection Agency. Critics say he's a climate change skeptic who's a friend to America's big energy companies. It comes after a setback for Mr. Trump when his candidate for the key post of National Security Advisor turned down the job. Robert Harwood had been tipped to replace Michael Flynn, who was sacked on Monday. Well, let's get more from our Washington correspondent, Laura Bicker. So a key job, and it is still vacant.
Well, we're hearing there may be job interviews this weekend, but Robert Harwood looked like a top pick. a former Rear Admiral, a former Navy SEAL. He decided to turn down the opportunity to serve his country and stand by President Trump. Now, we're hearing from the White House that they're citing family reasons for him turning down the job, but US media is reporting that he wanted his own team around him. Whatever the reason, it's yet another setback for Donald Trump and yet another hole in his personnel files 29 days in. He's faced those many days of fire in a White House trench, but he's decided to fight back. And yesterday it started with that cathartic press conference where he aired his grievances, got everything off his chest. He's still doing that. He's tweeted within the last half an hour calling the press not his enemy, but the enemy of the people. And then today he visited the Boeing factory where he faced the crowds of chanting workers who were shouting USA, USA. He looked comfortable, he looked animated, he talked about unleashing the power of the American spirit. This was Donald Trump back in campaigning mode, and it's just a warm-up. There is a rally in the swing state of Florida tomorrow, and yes, you're hearing me right. It is a campaign rally. After 4 weeks in office, Donald Trump is making his bid for 4 more years. Now, while he might sap up the energy from the crowds, it's not going to win him friends here in Washington. It's not going to help push his agenda through. And he still has to come back to work here on Monday.
Laura Bicker in Washington, thank you. A brief look at some of the day's other news stories, and the driver of a bin lorry that crashed in Glasgow in 2014, killing 6 people, has admitted to a motoring offence that occurred less than a year later. Harry Clark, seen here on the right, pleaded guilty to culpable and reckless driving in September 2015. His licence had already been revoked after the crash in George Square the previous year. One of the ringleaders behind the Hatton Garden raid of 2015 has admitted trying to steal £1 million of gems from a London jeweller's 5 years earlier. Daniel Jones is serving a prison sentence for his role in the infamous £25 million jewellery heist. He tried to break into a Mayfair jeweller's in 2010. And the new leader of UKIP, Paul Nuttall, has used his first speech at the party's spring conference to set out what he called a fair deal for working families. He said Brexit would allow VAT to be scrapped on many items, including domestic fuel bills, women's sanitary products and hot takeaway food. Pakistan's security forces say they've killed dozens of suspected militants following an attack on a shrine in the south of the country in which nearly 90 worshippers died. So-called Islamic State has claimed responsibility for yesterday's bombing, the latest in a spate of attacks. Pakistan's Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif says his nation is fighting a war for its very identity, as our correspondent in Islamabad, Sekunda Kamani, reports.
A place of worship becomes a place of anguish. Mourners pour through the hall of the shrine attacked last night. Whilst outside, they begin to bury the dead. This woman lost her 13-year-old son. His uncle spoke of the family's grief.
He wanted to pay his respects at the shrine. Evil people planted a bomb. He was martyred in the explosion.
This video shows just how busy the shrine was when the suicide bomber struck. Over 80 people are now believed to have been killed. So-called Islamic State have claimed responsibility. But it's just the latest in a number of deadly attacks across Pakistan this week. On Monday, 13 people were killed in a suicide bombing in the country's second largest city, Lahore. A splinter group of the Pakistani Taliban claimed responsibility for that attack. In a propaganda video, they vowed to unleash a new bombing campaign in Pakistan, working alongside other groups. The Prime Minister today visited victims from the attack on the shrine, as reports came in from across the country of raids on militants by counter-terrorism forces. But some say even more needs to be done.
It's not just a question of, lifting, raising the ante and then forgetting about it or taking it easy after a few days, after people forget about the event.
Do you think that might happen?
It's quite possible. This has been the pattern in the past.
There had been a growing sense of confidence from the authorities that the security situation in Pakistan was improving. But yesterday's bombing, the worst in the past 2 years, plus other attacks in the last week, have created unease amongst members of the public. There are real concerns that levels of violence could be on the rise once again. Back in the shrine tonight, alongside the grief, there's defiance. Worshippers chant the prayers that yesterday was silenced. Sikandar Kamani, BBC News, Islamabad.
Should patients be forced to pay to see a GP or for a visit to A&E to ease the financial pressure on the NHS? It's a controversial subject, but one that some feel should be considered. The Channel Island of Guernsey has been doing just that for decades, with islanders paying for many aspects of their care. But critics say it can deter people from seeking help. Our health editor Hugh Pym has been to Guernsey to find out more.
So that's 117.35.
A card payment machine in a hospital. Yes, it does happen in one part of the British Isles, here at A&E in Guernsey. You see the list of charges when you arrive, £49.50 during the day, more at night, and extras for minor treatment. There are ambulance charges too. 25% of the service's running costs come from patient fees, and it operates on land and sea.
This marine ambulance service mainly covers the smaller islands around Guernsey. Local people can either take out an annual subscription or might have to pay hundreds of pounds to be picked up and taken to hospital.
That subscription, less than £1 a week, is like an insurance policy. If you don't have it, the service says it won't demand an upfront payment.
Payment is never mentioned as part of the clinical care that we provide. They are sent an invoice within a couple of weeks following their use of the ambulance service.
For a GP visit, it's £50, and this doctor thinks that's fair for patients.
I think there are enough safeguards to ensure that people go when they really need to. I think inevitably payment for a service does make you think as to whether you really should be going.
Some residents pay for medical insurance. Anyone on benefits has their health costs covered by the state, though pensioners and children are not automatically exempt.
I had an accident at Christmas and I had to go to A&E, 170 quid. I just cut my toe. That's a lot of money.
There could be a reduction for pensioners because it is a lot of money out of your pension.
You can get to see a doctor within 1 or 2 days of notice, and the hospital's first class, yes.
There are no charges for ongoing hospital treatment and operations. Local politicians are worried that people on low incomes might delay seeking care.
I think that for those people who are just above that benefits threshold, they might not go to the GP early enough, and that might mean that when they do present, things have got worse, and then they have to be treated in the hospital environment.
But it's a relatively well-off, low-tax economy. Is there really any lesson for the NHS?
The real risk of charging is that we don't raise very much money, we increase the administrative complexity, and in fact people with really important healthcare conditions are deterred even further from going to see their medical practitioner when they really need the help.
If anyone wants to see a charging model, it's here, but politically it's not even on the horizon for the NHS. Any party advocating it might find its electoral chances are rapidly sunk. Hugh Pym, BBC News, Guernsey.
Now, after more than 20 years in charge at Arsenal, Arsene Wenger has hinted he may not be there for much longer. Today, he said he'd definitely be managing a team next season, whether that's at Arsenal or somewhere else. This week, his team were thrashed 5-1 by Bayern Munich in the Champions League. After the match, some former players suggested it was time for him to step aside. Our sports correspondent David Ornstein reports.
For Arsenal, the feeling was all too familiar. Badly beaten, all eyes on their boss. For club and coach, is the end finally in sight?
No matter what happens, I will manage next season. Is it here or somewhere else? You know, that's absolutely for sure. You do not stay somewhere for 20 years and you walk out of a defeat like that and you whistle, you know. I have the strength and the experience to respond to that.
In 1996, Wenger arrived to headlines of Arsene Who, but soon he silenced the critics by collecting trophies. A pioneer on and off the pitch, he turned the likes of Thierry Henry into superstars, and his team became invincibles, going an entire league season unbeaten. Among his achievements, 3 Premier League titles and 6 FA Cups. Well, Arsene Wenger hasn't only managed this club, he's transformed it. The team, their new stadium, and even this state-of-the-art training ground are all based on his vision. But not everything has gone to plan. He's failed to conquer Europe and hasn't won a league title since 2004, causing a split among the fans.
I've never seen Arsenal win the league, which is sad, and want that to happen.
He has done us proud, but I think he's overstayed now, isn't he?
And enough's enough. We need to move on. I'd like him to sort of announce he's going to step down now so he can go out on a good vibe. The fans will unite, because that's the main problem at the minute.
Arsenal are a club that pride themselves on stability and are not used to change.
Do people have to be careful what they wish for?
No, you know, you have to. I think what is important is that the club makes the right decisions for the future. I did not work here for 20 years not to care about this club, because I had many opportunities to go somewhere else during that period, and it is very important that the club is always in safe hands.
Arsenal are still in 3 competitions. Their season is far from over, but the future of their greatest manager looks more uncertain than ever before. David Ornstein, BBC News.
Well, that's it from us. Now on BBC One, the news where you are. Good night.